Hello, my name is Joe Pollock, and this is my first video. I started a YouTube channel called Real Talk About Religious Trauma because I've really felt like I've wanted to have conversations about stuff that has come up in my spiritual journey, and I keep waiting on the perfect timing or the perfect scenario or the perfect platform or some big major awe-inspiring event to set off these conversations about religious trauma, my journey, so many other people's journeys that I've met along the way. And I finally just decided, like, perfectionism is completely the enemy of progress. So I'm just gonna start. I'm gonna introduce myself in this video, tell a little bit about where I came from and my history and my ideas and my vision for where this might go. And we'll see what happens. I guess first I wanna say, to be completely vulnerable, my biggest fear is that nobody will ever watch this or ever see this. But at the end of the day, it's a great space for me to talk about the things that I'm going through, and it's very therapeutic for me to have conversations about this kind of stuff. Whether one person listens to it or a million people listen to it, it doesn't matter because it's still beneficial for me. So I've just decided I'm gonna say screw it. I'm gonna put my story out there, and I'm going to start talking about things that I've encountered on my spiritual journey. And if it resonates and it goes, then that's great. And if not, then at least I've found a space for me to process and work through a lot of my own stuff. So that being said, I am 45 years old and I will be 46 in just a few days. And it's been such a insane journey to get here. I was raised in a fundamental Pentecostal home, very traditional, very, very, very conservative, no television. Women weren't allowed to cut their hair, no secular music. Women had to wear skirts below their knees. Men were not allowed to wear shorts. We had to wear long pants. It was just an incredibly sheltered and conservative environment. And it also was a very fear-based religion. It was a lot of fire and brimstone and just a lot of hellfire. And there was a lot of fear instilled in me from a very, very, very young age. And I just spent most of my childhood perpetually terrified of everything. And, through this journey, I've realized, that trauma causes us to forget a lot of things. And I don't remember hardly any of the good times. If there were good times, I don't really remember the good times from my childhood. All I remember is just constant fear and torture and being terrified. From a very young age, I knew I was different. I was so sheltered. I was homeschooled or Christian schooled. And with no television, I didn't have a lot of worldly exposure. But I knew that there was something different about me. I knew that I was not attracted to women in the traditional way that everyone told me I was supposed to be. But I didn't know what gay was. I didn't know what homosexuality was. I didn't know any queer people. There weren't queer people in my environment because all we did was go to church. Everything else was taboo. Everything else was off limits. So it was just go to church, worship God, try not to sin, and don't die and go to hell. That's all I can really ever remember of my childhood. On top of that, I am a child of an alcoholic parent. My dad was a very traumatized individual as well. I understand that now through lots of years of therapy. But he was a very, very, very troubled and traumatized individual, and that was passed on through our family. He was abusive to my mother. He was abusive to me and my sister. We were just raised in an environment of chaos and pain and anxiety. And fast forward, I see that playing out in all of our lives now. I'm very close to my mother, and we have lots of conversations about those things. She is still very involved in the fundamental Pentecostal church. And my sister also very, very involved, married to a preacher. She has 2 daughters, and they are very involved in the church. But I, on the other hand, am not. I got married when I was 20 and had a wonderful marriage from everyone's outside perspective. I thought that if I do what I'm supposed to do and do everything right, then if I get married, the gay will go away. At 17, 18, 19 years old, I realized what I had. I realized what was wrong with me, and it was that I was gay. And if you had asked me 17, 18, 19, when I was praying and fasting and trying to pray the gay away, the thing I asked the most of God was just let me die and no one know. That was the ultimate dream. The ultimate vision for my life was just be able to fake this until I'm dead and nobody know that I'm one of them. That was the number one goal of my life. And I mean, on top of all of the trauma that I had, from abuse and all of those things, there was some sexual trauma with, some guys in the church and things like that when I was really young, like 7, 8 years old, much older guys. And just the guilt of that and the shame of that. And then the shame of knowing that I was the abomination that the church talked about and having to live with that guilt and shame. And it went so much greater than just being gay. Like you couldn't masturbate, you couldn't, have unclean thoughts, you couldn't touch yourself, all of that. Everything was so taboo and everything was so sinful. And I was struggling so hard. And I was just one of those kids that I was going to do everything right, because if I could be perfect, then maybe I would be good enough, even though I had this horrific secret that made me an abomination. And so my perfectionism started so early because I wanted to be the perfect kid, because then maybe if I did everything right and I was good enough, God would take this away and then I could be normal just like everybody else, because I thought then I was the only one on the planet that suffered from this problem. I didn't know anybody that had these issues. I didn't know anybody that was fighting the struggles that I was fighting, and we did not talk about it. That was like, you could talk about the sin of lying, or you could talk about the sin of greed, or you could talk about the sin of whatever it was, but you didn't talk about this sin. This sin was different. This was the abomination. This is why God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. This is why he turned Lot's wife into a pillar of salt, because she looked back at the homosexuals. And there was just so much hatred around it. And I would hear the hatred coming from the platform and the pulpit. And I knew it was me. And all I could think of was they can just never find out. No matter what happens, they can never find out. So the anxiety and the fear that was instilled in me at such a young age was just beyond crippling. And when I got older, like 16, 17, as I started to graduate high school, I was very good with academics. People started to question. I started getting comments. I was very involved in music. I loved to play the piano. I loved to sing. I was involved with the choir and things like that. And so people started to question. They started to make fun of me. Young adults my age started to say the words like fag and things like that. So then I got super defensive, like, oh my gosh, they can tell, they can see it. I'm doing something. The way I walk is wrong. I used to practice walking in front of a mirror because I just didn't want to walk like one of them. And meanwhile, not knowing a single person on the planet that claimed to be gay. And I didn't come out until 2006, 2007, so I missed the AIDS crisis. wherein, like, you know, the Reagan administration failed and a lot of queer people died. But I remember being a young adolescent, hitting puberty and all of those things, and having my hormones kick in, and facing all of those struggles, and the screaming hatred that came from the pulpit, you know, and the abomination, and God's judging the gays, and God's gonna kill the queers with AIDS. And, you know, I just remember all the hatred and just thinking, oh my gosh, you know, it just felt so horrible. And then to realize that think I'm one of them. And I didn't even know how people got AIDS. So I thought, like, oh my God, am I gonna catch it? And it was a very, very, very traumatizing time. But at a young age, I felt called into the ministry. I wrestled with it for a long time because I'm like, I can't be a preacher because I've got this secret. Like, I've got this thing that I'm an abomination. And I wrestled with it and finally surrendered to it, and began working with young people, teaching Sunday school class, youth leader, children's church director, you know, and the whole time just trying my best to help others. I had such a pull in my heart to help others and to minister and to try to make a difference in the world. I've always been an empath. I didn't even know what that was, but I've always felt the pain of others so strong and so big, and my heart ached for people who were suffering. But yeah, just meanwhile, completely imploding on the inside, and just so many times just thinking, I just wish I could die. If I can just die and nobody know, like, then we'll be okay. And it was just heart-wrenching and heartbreaking, and I felt so alone. I think ultimately I felt so alone, and I felt so betrayed by God, because nobody tried as hard as me. Nobody prayed as much as I did. Nobody fasted like I did to try to get rid of this horrific thing that I was carrying, and that was something that was so wrong with me. And but everybody looking on the outside, looking in. I had a beautiful wife. We sang, we traveled together, we played music together. We both have really good jobs. We were making great money. All while being very involved in the church and very loved by the church people. And from the outside looking in, it looked like I had it all. I had everything together. And on the inside, I was just crumbling. We were both virgins when we got married. Our wedding night was the first time either one of us had sex, and we had no idea what we were doing. And so that was really bad, on top of all of the issues that I was dealing with, and it just slowly started to crumble. And by the age of 25, I just wanted to die. I really, really, really just wanted to die. I didn't want to kill myself. I didn't want to end it. I didn't want to harm myself, but I just couldn't see a solution, so I wanted it to end. And right about 25, the internet kind of started to become a thing in 2004, 2005. I had internet access at work, working for an automotive company, and I started searching in like Yahoo groups and AOL chat rooms and things like that to try to meet some gay people. And maybe at first it started with like, I want to see if anybody else has overcome this. I want to see if anybody else has beat this. And then I started going to a Christian psychologist or therapist there in my hometown in Indiana. And I'll never forget, that was the first person I had ever told, I think I'm gay. And I told him that. I said, you know, he said, why are you here on the very first visit? And I said, I think I'm gay. And I'll never forget his response. He said, I don't have very good luck with your kind. And it just reinstilled that I'm broken, something's wrong with me. It brought it all up to the surface again. And I worked with him for some time and it was very ineffective. But one night we were in a Pentecostal church meeting. At that point, I was kind of at my wit's end. Kim and I had really grown apart. And I was asking God just whatever the solution is, like, and I really thought the solution was going to be, I would just go to sleep one night, die in my sleep, and I wouldn't wake up. And I'll never forget, my mother-in-law came back to me in the middle of a service, and she said, God just told me to tell you that the answer to what you're seeking starts when you tell your wife. And driving home from church that night, I'll never forget, Kim asked me, what's her name? She thought I was having an affair with a woman. And I said, there's no one. There's absolutely no one. And I meant it. And she just kept asking and kept asking. And finally, I just said it. I said, I'm gay. And the horrific trauma that followed that announcement, my life was just turned upside down. It was horrific. They tried to pray it away. I laid in the floor while they anointed me with oil and demanded that the spirit identify itself and all of those things. And it spiraled into a really, really, really dark state. But over a process of time, I ended up deciding I can't stay. I didn't know what that looked like. I had started to talk to some guys online. I started to realize there was a lot of gay people out there outside of my little tiny Indiana world. And so one day when she went to work, I packed up as much stuff as I could in my Jeep. And when she came home from work, I told her, I said, I'm done. I gotta go. I can't do this anymore. And I'll never forget, I had the passenger side door open and she just drove away with the door open. And I was crushed because I loved her so much. I cared about her as a human more than anyone else on the planet. But I was dying. I was absolutely falling apart. And I didn't think it would end well, honestly. There's so much I could get into and I won't today, but we'll dive into that stuff hopefully in the future. But I just didn't see a way of life that could possibly end well for me. At that point, I still believed in the whole heaven or hell thing. I literally thought I'm making a decision to burn in a lake of fire for all eternity. But the pain of the now was so great, I couldn't take it another second. And at that point, I just decided, like, I'll choose hellfire over the hell that I'm living on a 24-hour day-to-day basis right now. And I'll never forget the following years, those first few years away from the church, away from the church people. That was all I knew. All of my friends went to church. All of my family went to church. Everybody went to church. And just trying to figure out, at 27 years old, I entered the world as like a 6 or 7 year old emotionally and mentally, because I just had no concept of the world outside of my tiny religious bubble. And I was just broken and devastated and completely and utterly shattered on a level that just was beyond functioning. And Pentecostals are big in believing of like demon possession and spirits and casting out demons and casting out spirits. And I was terrified to go to sleep at night because I thought, when it got dark, like, I was just literally waiting, because I still believed it all then. And I was literally just waiting at whatever point the demon was going to just like walk into my house or walk into my bedroom and just literally like climb inside my body, and I was just petrified. I hated it when it got dark, and that went on for years. I would try to like not even get up and go to the bathroom at night, because just like the thought of getting out from under the covers was just terrifying. To walk across a dark room, I slept with lights on, and somewhere probably 29, 28, 29, 30, I found alcohol, and alcohol took all the fear away, and it helped me sleep. And I started drinking for fun at first, but I quickly started drinking to fall asleep at night. And within a year of finding alcohol, I was a full-blown alcoholic, just like my father. And alcohol played a huge part of my story, and hopefully we'll dive into that in the future. But alcohol played a huge part of my story. And I moved to Chicago, and I thought, I'm an atheist. I don't believe there's a God. If there was a God, I couldn't possibly believe that something that loves me would let me live this horrific of a life. I had a horrific childhood, and then I got to be gay on top of it all, and that was horrific. And then I lost everything, and I didn't have any friends, and I didn't understand how the world worked, and I was bad at money, and I was good at my job. I was an engineer, and I was good at my job, but like personal life was just zero. I just couldn't function. I met a guy that was 14 years older than me, and I fell madly in love, and that lasted, it was a horrific, rocky journey, because I was a horrific, rocky mess. And after a year and a half, close to 2 years, he ended it, and I was devastated, and I thought my world was over, and just more pain on top of pain on top of pain. But to fast forward, I found recovery, and that within itself was a rocky journey that we'll get into sometime. But recovery led me back to the idea of a higher power. And someone told me in recovery, said, like, you can make God anything you want God to be. Like build a bear, build a God kind of thing. Make it whatever you want. And I remember sitting down and making a list of all the things I wanted my God to be. And I put things like unconditional love and acceptance and celebrate my successes. And, as I'm writing all of these things, I'm like, there's no way that this is God. Like, God's a jerk. God hates me. God despises my very existence. I'm an abomination. But I'm writing all these things that I want God to be. And I pretended for many years that that's what God was. But I didn't believe any of it. I never believed any of it. And I struggled in and out of recovery. I struggled with my addiction. I struggled in relationships. I took all of my toxicity and brought it into another person after another person after another person, thinking they were going to fix me. They were going to make me happy. They were going to make me okay. And every single time it was more disasters. And fast forward, I'm skipping a lot, but fast forward to about 7 years ago. I had some relapses. I was struggling, and I had a sponsor at the time. Was still going to AA at that point. Don't go anymore. That's another video. But he told me that if he was going to continue to be my sponsor, I needed to get a therapist. And I was so adamant that I did not want to go to therapy. I had tried it a couple times in the past and had felt judged, I think, and it felt condemning, and it just left me feeling more broken than I already felt, which was, I felt like a shattered, useless shell of a human. And that day, I get emotional, sorry, but that day, when my therapist that I currently just adore, I can't say enough good about her, But that day when a black woman in a long flowy dress and combat boots and rainbow dreads opened the door and said, "Come on back." I immediately felt safe, and I had never felt safe before. And we started this journey, and if ever there's been an angel in my life, it was her. And today we're really good friends, and I simply adore her on a level that I can't quite explain. But yeah, you guys will hear a lot about her if you ever listen to any of these videos. But it was the first time I ever felt unconditional love from a human. And it took a lot of years for me to trust. It took me so long to open up, and she was so patient. She's still patient. We peeled back layer after layer. But to wrap this up, I today am a successful, happy, loving, healing, beautiful, beautiful version of a human that I did not know was possible. It had hurt for so long. The only thing I knew was pain. And I've seen it posted on social media so many times. I thought I was healing to be able to deal with the pain, but I've survived pain my whole life. I was healing so I could hold space for joy and happiness and peace. Because from the time I was a tiny child, I was told I didn't deserve those things. I deserved hell. I deserved to burn in a pit of fire for all eternity because I was an abomination and I was disgusting and I was vile. Today I know that's a lie. Today I know it was all a whole bunch of lies. They meant well, but it was a whole bunch of lies to control the masses. And I just want to start having honest conversations because there's so many people that I encounter on a day-to-day basis, especially in the queer community, but across the board, there are so many people who have lived with the same trauma that I have from the religious community. It's either conform or be completely shunned, and there's no in between. And the pain and the suffering that brings of trying to hold on to one world and hold on to who you are, and the pain and the ripping apart that takes place in your soul is just of another level. And today I understand I have PTSD. I understand that, I've lived through hell. I see it on social media again. It says, religious people do what's right because they're afraid of hell. But spiritual people have already been through it. And I have walked through hell, and I have come out on the other side, and I love my life today. Every day is a celebration. I lived with chronic anxiety my entire life, and today I have some peace, and I'm able to sleep at night, and I know that there isn't some weird, creepy guy sitting on a cloud in the sky just waiting to send me to a fiery pit. So moving forward, I want to have some really great conversations about my own thoughts on religious trauma. I want to talk with other people about religious trauma, and I want to share my journey, and I want to share some of the people who have been so inspiring to me, and I just want to start having conversations about where this goes. There used to be a lot of hatred towards the religious community, and a lot of anger and a lot of rage. And some days it's still there. Today, in today's political climate, I struggle so much with not getting angry and not getting hate-filled, and I want to fight some days. But most days I fall back into love, and I love myself, and I love me, and I love this queer, crazy version of who I am and the life that I have today. So I hope this starts a conversation with really incredible people, and it starts a community, and we start to have conversations. But if not, it's a great, great, great opportunity for me to work through and process. You know, even this conversation that we just had, or I just had, I really haven't revisited a lot of those feelings in a very long time, and it just reminds me why I want to have these type of conversations. So here's to the journey, and here's to a whole lot of real talk about religious trauma. I'll see you on the other side.